Combs' ex-girlfriend, Cassie Ventura.
She said that if there was a time when you were getting beat up in a room and couldn't walk out, you would reimagine it in a way that you were actually able to leave the room.
You were in the courtroom. I want to get your sense of how the jury was reacting to Cassie's testimony throughout the week, especially.
Details of alleged freak-off parties have surfaced, creating a storm in the courtroom as old love messages clash with 4 days of chilling testimony. Cassie's shocking claims involving sex parties and a violent assault are sending shockwaves to trial, and Diddy appears to be unraveling under the pressure.
Combs' ex-girlfriend, Cassie Ventura, is set to retake the stand and face what we expect to be her final round of questioning under cross-examination. Court currently is on a short lunch break, but if you recall, the judge previously said that he wanted Ventura's cross-examination to wrap up before lunch today. Prosecutors have said that Ventura, who's nearly 9 months pregnant, could soon go into labor.
Over the last hour, the defense has been asking Ventura more about her 2018 rape allegation against Combs, Ventura's drug use, her mental health problems, and a 2014 threat that she made to a man who claimed he had seen a sexually explicit tape of her, also raised in court. The defense at one point asking Ventura, quote, "Do you still have love for him?" referring to Combs, and Ventura answered by saying, quote, "I have love for the past and what it was."
Cassie's testimony sent shockwaves through the courtroom, leaving even the most composed observers stunned. This wasn't just a story of a troubled relationship. It was something far darker, more disturbing, and deeply unsettling. At the heart of her allegations were what she referred to as freak-off parties, private events that she claimed were designed and controlled by Diddy, where women were allegedly coerced into performing acts for his entertainment, and that as high-profile guests. Her testimony painted a grim and deeply troubling picture. According to Cassie, these were not typical Hollywood gatherings with glitz and glamour. They were carefully orchestrated environments where consent was blurred and power dynamics were exploited. She testified that early in their relationship, she was pressured into attending these parties and quickly realized that saying no wasn't an option. Diddy allegedly controlled everything, from what she wore to how she behaved and who she interacted with to the outside world. Their relationship looked like a fairy tale. Lavish vacations, red carpets, and affectionate appearances. But inside the courtroom, Cassie dismantled that illusion. She described a relationship built on manipulation and control that began almost immediately, with participation in these parties framed as a non-negotiable part of being with him. Her emotional testimony revealed that she was made to feel powerless, caught in a toxic dynamic that revolved around dominance and submission. The atmosphere in the courtroom was electric. Audible gasps filled the room as she described how these gatherings unfolded. Cassie claimed that influential guests, selected for their wealth and status, mingled with women who were expected to follow unspoken rules without question. The message, she said, was clear. Don't resist, don't speak out. Just do what you're told. For the prosecution, this was a pivotal moment. Her account wasn't just about individual incidents. It showed a consistent pattern of psychological and emotional abuse. These freak-off parties, they argued, were a means of maintaining control, stripping Cassie of her independence and reinforcing Diddy's alleged dominance behind closed doors, all while preserving a carefully polished public image. Then came the bombshell. Cassie revealed that at one of these parties, Diddy allegedly instructed her to engage in sexual acts with others while he watched. She described feeling dehumanized and completely powerless, moments she now calls among the darkest in her life. Her words added devastating weight to the case, portraying Diddy as someone who uses influence not just to manipulate, but to orchestrate situations she never would have agreed to under normal circumstances. The courtroom grew increasingly tense. Even Diddy struggled to maintain his composure as the allegations mounted. Observers exchanged stunned glances, the emotional intensity in the room impossible to ignore. And this was just the beginning. Cassie's testimony wasn't only compelling, it was potentially backed by evidence. The prosecution hinted at surveillance footage from a 2016 incident that had yet to be fully introduced, briefly referenced after her testimony. This video promised to lend even more credibility to her claims, and anticipation in the courtroom soared as everyone waited for what was coming next. With each revelation, Cassie's story shifted the tone of the trial, exposing a dark underside of fame and power that many weren't prepared to confront.
The defense is right when they say that Cassie Ventura is the most critical witness to this case. The defense is doing its job because what they're trying to do is bring out that she's not a perfect person, that they're saying she might have wanted to engage in these freak-offs on more than one occasion, that she was willingly staying in this relationship with Sean Combs, even though she knew that it was an abusive one. They're bringing out things that she said to other people that are less than flattering. All that being said, the government doesn't need to have a perfect victim. What the government has done this week essentially is establishing the sex trafficking crimes that they've charged Sean Combs with. And I would argue that they are well on their way to proving these crimes. A lot of people don't realize that with sex trafficking, you don't have to have movement anywhere. You don't have to go across state lines. A lot of times people confuse it with human smuggling. Here, somebody can be trafficked in their own home. All you really need is someone providing somebody else for that commercial sex act. And when I say commercial, I mean anything of value, not even necessarily money, to be given by force or coercion. And so Cassie Ventura has done her job this week for the government, and now the defense is doing its job to try to make it seem as if she wanted to be in this relationship and that what happened in those freak-offs was not coerced.
The courtroom fell silent.
The courtroom fell into a stunned silence as the prosecution presented the long-awaited surveillance footage linked to a 2016 assault, an incident that has become central to Cassie's case against Diddy. Until this point, much of the trial had relied on Cassie's emotional testimony and detailed allegations. But the introduction of actual video evidence marked a turning point. This wasn't just about her word against us anymore. Now, there was something concrete, something visual that couldn't be dismissed so easily. The footage, though not shown publicly, was described by those present as chillingly clear and strongly supportive of Cassie's version of events. According to her testimony, the 2016 assault was one of the most terrifying moments of their relationship, a flashpoint of escalating violence and control. She said she felt trapped and overwhelmed, cornered by Diddy's rage, which she claimed had long been a recurring threat behind closed doors. On this occasion, she alleged that things went further than ever before. Cassie's vivid account of being physically harmed was hard to hear, but the video drove it home in a way words alone could not. Jurors, witnesses, and even courtroom reporters noted the dramatic shift in atmosphere as the footage played. Several jurors reportedly leaned in, their faces tense, while others exchanged glances as they processed what they were seeing. The prosecution seized the moment, using the footage to validate Cassie's timeline and reinforce her credibility. They argued that it wasn't just an isolated outburst. It was evidence of a larger pattern of coercion, violence, and psychological control. The video became a visual anchor, making it much harder for the defense to suggest that Cassie's claims were exaggerated or fabricated. Before this bombshell, Diddy's legal team had attempted to frame the relationship as chaotic but consensual, painting a picture of two passionate individuals whose romance simply went sour. But the footage challenged that narrative directly. It gave weight to Cassie's claims of abuse and control, dramatically weakening the defense's assertion that theirs was a mutual, if volatile, relationship. The defense team, visibly rattled by the video's impact, attempted damage control. Their argument focused on context. They claimed the footage showed only a moment in time and did not reflect the overall dynamic of the relationship. They also questioned whether the scene truly represented the nature of Cassie and Diddy's years together, suggesting the jury shouldn't let one clip define the entire relationship. Legal analysts noted the risks of this strategy, trying to downplay the significance of such powerful evidence, especially when it so clearly supported an alleged victim's account, could easily backfire. Still, the defense moved forward, pivoting to a surprising new tactic, introducing old affectionate messages Cassie had sent Diddy after their breakup. Their hope? To cast doubt on the consistency of her claims and suggest that their post-relationship communication undermined the idea of long-term abuse. But whether that would be enough to shift the jury's perception remained unclear. What was clear, however, was that the trial had taken a serious turn. The footage gave Cassie's testimony an added layer of credibility and emotional weight. For many in the room, it was one of the most pivotal moments in the proceedings so far, transforming allegations into something undeniably real and raising the stakes for both sides as the case moved forward.
You were in the courtroom. I want to get your sense of how the jury was reacting to Cassie's testimony throughout the week, especially the pictures and the texts that they got to see so far.
Well, I was in the overflow room today, but the consensus about the jury is that they've been pretty stoic. There was one juror who seemed to have a bit of a reaction when they were shown sealed photos. I believe it was about 2 days ago. These were freeze frames of Cassie and Sean Combs and an escort in an alleged freak-off still shots. So there was a little bit of a reaction there. But again, overall, the consensus also in the overflow room is just that people are shocked at a lot of this testimony, a lot of the evidence that's coming in, and it's tough. We are seeing, I guess, just like this side of Cassie that, unfortunately she's had to disclose to all of us to help get a conviction for Sean Combs. And you really feel for her because she's remained so composed throughout, her cross-examination, her direct, the redirects, and she's 8.5 months pregnant, and we didn't see her lose her temper or just get, angry at all or frustrated, and I find that to be pretty incredible.
The defense believed they had found a strategy that could undercut the emotional power of Cassie's explosive testimony by presenting affectionate messages she allegedly sent to Diddy after their breakup. On paper, it seemed like a calculated move. Use Cassie's own words to cast doubt on her narrative. If she had truly endured years of abuse, why would she maintain a friendly tone with her alleged abuser? But once the messages were introduced in court, the atmosphere shifted, not in the defense's favor. Instead of delivering the game-changing moment they'd hoped for, the messages landed awkwardly, coming off as a weak attempt to redirect attention from the disturbing details Cassie had already shared. The content of the messages, light, sometimes even playful, was intended to suggest Cassie still harbored affection for Diddy after the relationship ended. The defense emphasized this point, arguing that her behavior didn't match her accusations. Their aim was to sow doubt. If her trauma was real, why stay in touch? But the prosecution was quick to respond, arguing that trauma doesn't follow a predictable script. They accused the defense of stripping the messages of their context and using them to spin a misleading narrative. According to them, Cassie's communication with Diddy after their breakup wasn't a contradiction. It was a survival tactic, a coping mechanism for someone trying to safely exit a controlling relationship. Cassie later addressed the messages herself during her continued testimony. She didn't deny them. In fact, she faced them head-on. She explained to the jury that maintaining a cordial tone with Diddy felt necessary at the time, part of a larger pattern of manipulation and fear that didn't simply disappear once she walked away. The messages weren't about love or longing. They were about staying safe. Her honesty struck a powerful chord in the courtroom. What the defense tried to use against her ended up reinforcing her account. She told the jury that even after ending the relationship, the years of psychological and emotional control still lingered. According to Cassie, friendliness wasn't affection, it was self-preservation. And in that context, the messages didn't contradict her claims of abuse. They illuminated just how complex and insidious that abuse had been. Observers noted how Diddy's demeanor noticeably shifted during this portion of the trial. Earlier, when his legal team introduced the text, he appeared composed, perhaps even confident. But as Cassie explained their true meaning, the impact was visible. His expression stiffened. His composure wavered. For the first time, it looked like the weight of her words had struck a nerve. Meanwhile, the public watching the case unfold was divided. Some questioned why Cassie stayed in touch if her accusations were genuine. Others, particularly those familiar with the complexities of abusive dynamics, were quick to defend her. They pointed out that survivors often struggle to break ties completely, especially when emotional manipulation and fear are part of the equation. Critics of the defense's approach called it tone-deaf and out of touch with how real-life abuse manifests. They argued that instead of discrediting Cassie, the strategy highlighted the legal team's misunderstanding of trauma and its long-term psychological effects. In the end, what was meant to undermine Cassie's case ended up doing the opposite. Her calm and candid response turned the tables. She showed the jury that survival doesn't always look the way people expect it to. And just like that, the so-called damning evidence became another layer in a story of manipulation, fear, and endurance be why the time her testimony wrapped that day, the energy in the courtroom had shifted once again. The jury leaned in closer. The gallery buzzed with whispers. And Diddy's defense team looked like they'd lost more ground than they gained. All eyes were now on what Cassie would reveal next.
This like, when you hear all these things, and of course this is their side of the story, but when you hear these things, it's just like, dude, like, why was this man so possessive, so demonic, so just, I don't know, like, you got that much money, you're on the top of the world, and you really think that you're invincible. I mean, people can be rich and do a gang of positive things for people, you know? I ain't saying he ain't never helped anybody out, but a lot of times when they do that, it's to mask all the craziness that they do. But I'm just saying, think about someone in his position just doing good and great things for people, man. But you have this, you know? Doing all the freaky stuff, all the, like, that's not the issue with him having that type of life. It's just when all the illegalness comes in, you know? And I think that's what people are getting confused on. They think like the domestic stuff and the other stuff don't go hand in hand. It does. And even though he's not being charged with, it goes hand in hand. And like I said, if you're on the jury, I don't know how you can look past that. It's the control factor. So he was using intimidation to get what he wants.
From the moment Cassie took the stand, the focus wasn't solely on her. Many eyes were locked on Diddy. But it wasn't just about hearing her words. It was about watching his reactions as she delivered them. Known for his composed and confident public image, Diddy's demeanor began to shift early on, and as Cassie's allegations intensified, the cracks became impossible to ignore to AS. She recounted the most disturbing parts of her testimony, particularly the allegations surrounding the so-called freak-off parties. Diddy's discomfort was palpable. Cassie didn't speak in generalities. She described specific events in vivid detail, explaining how she was allegedly coerced, manipulated, and made to feel powerless. The courtroom grew increasingly tense as she spoke, the silence growing heavier with each revelation. Observers noted how Diddy began to shift uncomfortably in his seat during this portion. He wasn't just passively listening or conferring calmly with his attorneys. His body language spoke volumes. Clenched jaw, furrowed brow, fidgeting hands. At moments, he appeared visibly frustrated, his restrained facade slipping into clear agitation. But things escalated further when the prosecution played surveillance footage related to the alleged 2016 assault. While the video wasn't released to the public, those in the room described its impact as chilling. As the footage played, Diddy leaned back in his chair, exhaled heavily, and looked away from the screen. For a man who has long curated a powerful, untouchable image, this moment of visible vulnerability was striking. Legal analysts were quick to point out that a defendant's demeanor can be just as telling to a jury as any testimony. While a calm, unshaken presence might suggest control or innocence, visible irritation, or worse, emotional outbursts can read as defensiveness or guilt. And in Diddy's case, the optics weren't in his favor. The weight of the moment wasn't lost on the courtroom. As Cassie delved deeper into her experience, describing what she said was a pattern of coercion, degradation, and psychological control, audible gasps and murmurs rippled through the gallery. Her voice was steady, her tone clear, even as she described feeling trapped and emotionally broken by the dynamic she was forced to endure. Jurors, who had remained mostly still throughout the trial, began to visibly react. Some shifted in their seats. Others glanced toward Diddy, gauging his response to the accusations. A few stayed locked on Cassie, expressions of concern and discomfort etched across their faces. Then came a particularly powerful moment. Cassie described an incident where, According to her, Diddy used his status and influence to publicly humiliate her, asserting control in a way that left her emotionally shattered. As she spoke, Diddy shook his head in disbelief and leaned toward his attorney, whispering something sharply. Though his words weren't audible, the energy shift was immediate. It was clear to anyone watching, this testimony was getting under his skin. From that point on, every move Diddy made seemed magnified. Every sigh, every head shake, every tense exchange of his legal team added another layer to the courtroom drama. The prosecution didn't need to say a word. Diddy's body language was doing some of their work for them. The contrast was stark. Cassie's calm, controlled delivery versus Diddy's visibly framed composure. The climax came when Cassie spoke about the emotional aftermath of the coercion she said she endured. She described a life lived in fear, with no real choice but to comply. Her words painted a haunting image of entrapment, one where resistance didn't feel like an option. As she shared this, Diddy's restraint finally cracked. According to those in the room, he clenched his fists, leaned forward, and exchanged what appeared to be intense whispers with his attorneys. The outburst wasn't loud, but its impact was deafening. For a few moments, the courtroom was silent. You could feel the air shift, the tension stretch taut. It became clear that this trial wasn't just about legal arguments or written evidence. It was about moments like these. Moments where body language, raw emotion, and real-time reactions might carry just as much influence as any piece of evidence ever could.
She said that if there was a time when you were getting beat up in a room and couldn't walk out, you would reimagine it in a way that you were actually able to leave the room. Do you see this potentially backfiring on the defense?
Oh, Brianna, you took the words right out of my mouth. Yes, you are exactly right. The defense needs to be really careful what they're doing here because she is a victim. She is a victim. She has put herself out there and saying that she survived these horrific instances of rape, of other assaultive behaviors, some of which we've seen evidence of on that videotape that CNN exclusively obtained and then broadcast, and thank goodness for that. And so with the defense trying to go down this road, trying to attack her therapy, the government's going to get right back up there and say, well, the only reason she needed to go to therapy and seek EMDR and the other types of therapy was because of the actions of your client, Combs' attorney team. So they're going to go right back at it and say that had she not been so brutally traumatized, she wouldn't have had to seek therapy, and that's a good thing. And certainly anybody on that jury who's ever been to therapy or knows anything about it, they're going to be thinking about how Cassie Ventura could be being traumatized right now, again, in having to relive all of the various questioning for days from both sides. So you're right, Brianna. This is a slippery slope that the defense team is on right now with her.
Cassie's lawsuit against Diddy isn't just another celebrity courtroom drama. It's a symbol of a larger cultural shift sweeping through Hollywood and beyond. For decades, the entertainment industry has operated under a veil of power, money, and silence, when most influential figures were often shielded from real consequences. But that era is steadily crumbling under the weight of accountability. And this case is another major crack in that foundation. What's unfolding in this courtroom goes far beyond a single relationship. It speaks to deep-rooted systems of control, manipulation, and silence that have allowed abuse to go unchecked for years. Just a few years ago, accusations are serious, alleging coercion, manipulation, and psychological abuse might have been buried or dismissed as tabloid fodder. But in a post-#MeToo world, the rules have changed. Cassie's bravery in coming forward is part of a broader reckoning. Her voice joins a growing chorus of survivors who are no longer willing to be silenced, no longer afraid to expose the ugly truths hiding behind fame and success. Her testimony and the explosive nature of the allegations, particularly surrounding the so-called freak-off parties and the 2016 assault, have pierced the glamorous illusion of celebrity culture, revealing the toxic power dynamics beneath. We've seen this story before. Harvey Weinstein's conviction was a turning point that shook the industry. It opened the door for others to speak up against Russell Simmons, Kevin Spacey, R. Kelly, and more. Now, Diddy stands at a similar crossroads, and the outcome of this trial could shape how the industry handles cases like these in the future. Public reaction has been vast and mixed. Many have rallied behind Cassie, calling her courageous for confronting a figure as powerful as Diddy. Social media has erupted in support, and conversations about abuse, power, and survival have taken center stage. But there's also skepticism. Some have questioned the timing of her lawsuit. Others, clinging to her past affectionate messages to Diddy, have tried to minimize her claims, pointing to them as signs of mutual consent or contradiction. But this split in public opinion reflects the deeper challenge: society's ongoing struggle to understand how abuse works. In Hollywood, where image and power dominate, it's especially difficult for victims to come forward without risking everything: their reputation, career, safety. Cassie's case is not just a personal risk. It's a public stand against an empire. For Diddy, this trial could alter his legacy forever. For decades, his name has been synonymous with success, an entrepreneur, producer, and cultural icon. But now, the very empire he built is being scrutinized under the harshest light. If these allegations hold, his downfall won't just be legal, it will be cultural. The real weight of this case lies not in settlements or verdicts, but in what it represents. It's a direct challenge to how power has been wielded and abused in the entertainment industry. Whether or not Diddy is found legally responsible, the damage to his public image is already unfolding. And in many ways, the court of public opinion is just as relentless. This trial is more than a personal dispute. It's a reckoning, a call to re-examine the unchecked power structures that have long defined Hollywood. Cassie's story, painful and raw, has become a lightning rod for a broader conversation about justice, accountability, and truth and no matter how this trial ends, one thing is clear: the silence that once protected the powerful is breaking. Victims are finding their voices, and the world is finally listening. This isn't just about Diddy. It's about the industry. It's about the system. And it's about time.